I'm your host, Regina DeMeo, and we're here today to share ideas that will help families tackle major issues. Today's show is about planning a funeral, and with me today I have the honor of having Donna Vincent Roa. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, good morning. Glad to be here.
Thanks. So I am so thrilled to go over this book, The Ultimate To-Do List, and I have to ask you, what inspired you to write this book?
Yeah, it was a 2 o'clock call in the morning. My mom was sick, and I knew that she was going to die, but we didn't know when, as no one knows. I received that call and realized here I was, a middle-aged woman who had never done a funeral before. So I went on the internet frantically searching for a to-do list or a process map or something that said, start here. Here are the things that you need to do. And I couldn't find it. What I found were books about financial planning or books about the funeral industry or just other books that described what you need to think about if you're 2 years out. What I was looking at is an important life event that was to happen within the next 72 hours. That inspired me to write the book. But it was only until after I came back from the funeral did I realize that I needed to. One, I exhibited or I experienced a need. Where's that to-do list? But two, when I came back during the funeral, I kept this small notebook and I would write down things, and someone would say, what about the boutonnieres, or who are the pallbearers, or what about flowers, and what about food? And so I just started writing all these things down because I didn't come to the table knowing all the things that I needed to do. And when I got back home, I looked at that little to-do list and I realized, one, I wasn't prepared. Two, that if I have this material, if I have this to-do list, somebody else also needs it.
Right.
And it was at that moment where I said to myself, in honor of my mom who passed away, I knew that she would want me to help others with this kind of information. So I took an entire year building on that one paper-based to-do list and doing research about many, many aspects of the funeral industry and how to make this important event happen.
So I have to tell you that I have not planned a funeral myself, but when I was reading this, it was like planning a wedding, except you have 3 days instead of 9 months, for example. I mean, you have the florist, you have the minister that's going to actually give the ceremony, you have pallbearers, like you said, you have to talk about flowers. I mean, it seemed like a wedding. Am I right?
Exactly. If you were to compare weddings and funerals, they're celebrations. One is celebration of a union, and the other is a celebration of life. We should all be prepared. Let me back up first and say that we also need to be the generation that talks about death and is ready for death. We need to be prepared. So if you look at weddings and funerals and compare them, we think about this union and this event and we prepare. We put the money together, we look at where we're going to travel, we look at all these different details, and over that 6-month period we're fairly calm about it, maybe anxious about getting married in general, but about the process, because we give ourselves so much time.
Right.
It's easy and it's calm. But when you're looking at putting together the celebration of life event or a funeral, and you have just a few days to do it, you need a to-do list. Now, what I would recommend, that while this is a to-do list, that if you learn tomorrow morning that your mother died, you could take this book and follow the to-do list and do very well. However, what I would recommend now based on experience is buy the book early. If your mom or dad or loved one is in a hospice, sit down with them, open the book, and go through all the choices. Understand the preferences of your loved one and prepare.
I agree, but I have to tell you this. Some of my friends, I consider them very well-educated people, and yet they don't want to talk about the subject of death. And I mean, I learned a lot from this book, but do you find that some people are kind of, oh, well, I don't need that right now? Have you found that?
Exactly. I would say across the board it's been that way. And I think that if you're not prepared or if you don't think about it, you're going to be stressed out. You're going to be one who doesn't have enough time to grieve. I'll give you an example. A friend of mine, I was posting on my Facebook page about how I was developing the book. I would say, oh, I got my headshot done. Now the book has a cover. I've identified the designer. And I'm still writing it as I'm providing these updates. A friend of mine called me. I haven't heard from her by phone in several years. And at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning, she called me and she says, I don't know what state your book is in, but I want it right now. My dad just passed away an hour ago, and I need to see that to-do list.
Oh, wow.
I emailed her a PDF of the book without the cover, just the PDF, still with errors and typos. You know, I'm still working on it. But the essence of the book was together. And within a week, she called me back and she said, that book saved my life. I didn't know what to do. And I admit that now. I may have not admitted it before. But she said one important thing in that book is as I read through it, I realized, wait a second, my dad is a veteran. He deserves a military funeral. Here we are making these plans. Never thought about it until I turned to the chapter on military funerals. And we realized, my dad deserves a military funeral. Here's what we need to do. He would have missed out on that because I wasn't prepared, because I didn't know. I didn't think of this in the moment when this flurry of activities was happening.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, I'm very naive, I have to say. I thought you just kind of called the funeral director, paid them $10,000, and then they took care of everything. But I guess that's not the case.
It's more than that. And I would say another very important moment and a memory for me was after my mom had passed away, within minutes, we realized we almost forgot the last rites. We're Catholic, and that's part of our religious culture to do last rites, and we almost forgot about it because we're so in the moment. We're so thinking about what's going to happen next. And just, being able to ask questions while things are happening because you don't know. I remember asking in the hospital, what happens to the body after this? Because it was in Beaumont, Texas, and the funeral was going to be in Lake Charles. And, what happens? How do you prepare the body? So much information that we don't know, and it's a process that we're responsible for. So connecting that to your idea about when do you grieve, if you're responsible for this process, you don't. You have to be strong, you have to be organized, and you have to be ready to respond to anything that happens during this process.
I mean, I was overwhelmed. You were talking in here about transferring a body. If you're transferring interstate, there's certain things you have to take care of. And, again, with the military, I didn't realize that, there's all these things you have to fill out. And it's overwhelming. So I can't imagine you'd have the time to grieve until after, which is why I found it fascinating. You actually put as a to-do afterwards, seek out support groups or seek out a grief counselor. And, is that something that you would recommend that everybody, or, just like people that can't cope with death need to go and figure out?
Well, connecting to what you said earlier, when people don't want to deal with death or talk about death, when they experience death, then I firmly believe that you need to look at the grieving part of the process. Because if I'm not going to be freely talking about death, if I'm not going to positively respond to some book like this, then potentially I don't know how to also grieve when that happens. And if you're the executor of this process, there's so much to do that by the time it's all over with, you realized, I missed the opportunity to grieve. I missed that moment. Now I need to take care of myself. I lost someone. That's a major event in your life. So to go forward, I think it's wise to look at grief counseling and help you through that process. In some cases, it may be that you have a confidant or a friend to help you through the process, but sometimes getting professional help will be better.
Yeah, I have to say I see it all the time in the divorce world because that's what I do, but there is this grief cycle that we have to be aware of, right, which is that you will have moments of anger, which you don't really expect to have, but there are moments of anger, there's real moments of sadness, and then you have your happy memories that come up, and then you have your moments of happiness. But you got to go through that whole cycle, and it's hard to navigate all of those emotions without some help.
Right. I was also thinking about from the person, let's say for example the person who's about to die, they know it. if they had a copy of this book, they sit down with their loved one and say, here are my preferences. Here's what I'd like to have as a pallbearer. Here's what kind of flowers I like. I like blue. I want a deck of cards in my casket. I'd like to have a rosary, or in some cases, I want a jazz funeral. I'd like to have New Orleans jazz played during my funeral. Or I want a harp. It's like, it's your precious moment. And to have the book ahead of time, for those people who know they're going to die, preparing is important. And I was thinking, if, let's say theoretically that you don't like your kids, well, don't prepare for your funeral. Now conversely, if you love your kids, sit down with them and talk about your funeral. Let them know. As I wrote this book, I realized that important point, and at the end of it, I wrote the details of my own funeral. I had to think about that. What do I want to tell my family? And because I work in the environment, I'm managing partner and chief strategist of Vincent Roa Group, and we specialize in environmental issues and environmental communication. So as I wrote the book, I said, I've got to really trust my own interests and passions and apply that to my celebration of life.
Right.
And that drove me to dig deeper about a green funeral. I wanted to understand, how can I have a sustainable death?
I have to say, I love that section in the book. I had no idea that there even was a green funeral. And there's something called the Green Council.
Green Burial Council.
Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. The Green Burial Council is a nonprofit organization that focuses on certifying different aspects of the funeral industry to ensure that they're sustainable or ensure that they're green. It's a great resource for anyone interested in, say, identifying a green cemetery. I just learned there's one in Washington, and it's the only one in the D.C. metro area, and they just had their funeral, I think a couple of days ago, like within the last month. So it's growing, people are learning about it, but not many people know about it. And I think an important point to mention through all this planning process is that each of us have options. Whether it's a green funeral, whether it's cremation, whether it's putting your body in a mausoleum or a casket, it really is a personal preference. And for me, I'd like for my funeral to be green. Through my research, I contacted a woman who has a firm in California, and she specializes in creating silk shrouds. And the one I'd like, as mentioned in my book, is one that is made with lavender. It's the seams are tucked with lavender so that the shroud smells like lavender, and it's pure silk, and it's made for a natural burial. I also chose the burial site. So for green funerals, you're put in a hand-dug grave, typically in a bamboo casket, a silk shroud, as I mentioned, or pine box, which is 100% wood, no nails, no glue. It's all put together without nails or glue, and you're buried in the ground. In some cases, in some cemeteries, they put a GPS on the body, so if you want to go into the cemetery, they don't have headstones, but you can follow the GPS signal to where your loved one lies.
This is so fascinating. We're going to take a little short break, and then we'll be right back.
Packers, Viking, Packers, Viking, Viking.
Red state, blue state, vegan,
carnivore.
We come from different places.
Uptown,
downtown,
optimist, cynic.
We come to different conclusions.
Half empty,
half full.
But when we live united, we create real, lasting change in the building blocks of life. The education, income, and health of our communities, our families,
united.
Even the person next to us.
Live united.
Real change won't happen without you. So give, advocate, volunteer, live united. Sign up at liveunited.org.
Welcome back to Making It Last. I'm your host, Regina DeMeo, and we've been talking about funerals and how you plan for a funeral. And my guest today is Donna Vincent Roa. Thank you so much, Donna, for being here.
You're welcome.
So we've been talking about green funerals, and I don't mean to stay on this subject, but it's fascinating because, I like to recycle. I like to make sure that I leave as few footprints as possible. I take the metro. I really do my best to try and preserve the environment. Not everybody is like that, but for those of us that want to be more conscious, especially when we die, So is there like a checklist that you might recommend for people that want to
Sure.
go into this more?
The Green Burial Council actually puts together a planning guide, and it covers everything from environmental aims, what is your goal, to how you want your body to be prepared, what kind of container that you want. Do you want a shroud? Do you want a casket? What kind of viewing? Do you want a funeral at home, for example, which makes it even more green? And then how you want to be disposed and what kind of cemetery you'd like to be in. And then whether or not you want to have a memorialization, a tree, a marker, a set of flowers, memorial marker. Now each cemetery is different and they have different rules. There are some that allow no markers, and then other ones would allow you to put a rock that you're familiar with.
Okay.
Yeah. And then other items. So the Green Burial Council is a very good resource for individuals looking to do a green funeral. I'd also say that in my book, I wrote my final epilogue describing how I want my own funeral, and it focuses on green aspects. The book also includes all the cemeteries that have been certified as green or ones that offer their clients a green burial.
Wow. So we haven't really talked about cost, but I mean, a mini wedding in D.C. is about $20,000. So what's the average, do you know, for a funeral?
15 to 20 if you're on the low side.
Wow.
When you go in to purchase your casket, if you're interested in the traditional casket burial, you have an exhibit of the different kinds of caskets that are available. And one thing I highly recommend is to have in your mind, what budget do you want to spend on a casket? For some people, it's $5,000. So when you go in, you know that that's your budget. So if the funeral service provider says, well, come and see these, they're up in the $20,000 range, you've already set your budget and you make your decisions with that budget, because oftentimes you're in that moment of grieving and it's very easy to just choose something. If you look at all the caskets, I would say that it's very difficult to figure out the difference between a $20,000 and a $5,000. You have to look really close.
Well, I mean, this is where the conservative side of me is like, who cares? You're going to be, you won't be around to enjoy it, and it's going to go into the ground or into a fire. So,
Right.
I noticed that you said something about actually shopping around, and maybe Costco and Walmart carry
That's
caskets.
right.
No idea. So what is a cheap casket?
You could probably get it for about $600 or $700.
Okay, well, that's what I'm
Yeah.
going for. Wow, so I had no idea that's how much they range in prices.
Right. If you Google caskets, as an example, that's our new way to gather information, you'll find that there's caskets on the green side, as I mentioned earlier, the bamboo caskets, the caskets that are made of jute, and then there are caskets that are made of metal, and wood would be in between. But there's really a big variety of caskets, and depending on what you want to do and how much you want to pay, then you can choose. There are vendors like Costco and Walmart. There are also vendors that would mail you your casket, and you can pre-order them if you're interested. Now, I don't know, my basement doesn't have enough room to put a casket.
Right, that's a little creepy.
Now, if I bought a shroud, I could fold that up and put it in a drawer somewhere, but that's quite easy. But one thing I want to mention about caskets, I read a fact that said within a 1-year period, 12 months, we put enough metal in the ground to rebuild the Golden Gate Bridge.
Oh, wow.
And we put enough concrete in the ground to have a highway from New York to California. That's a lot of stuff we're putting in the ground. Now, some people will say, well, why do we need the concrete? It is a cemetery need.
Oh.
Because when you dig a hole and you fill it back up with dirt, if the concrete box is not there, then the dirt sinks in. And so the concrete box keeps the dirt flat. And so it keeps the graves from sinking.
Wow. I mean, that's a lot to think about. And there was something about the emission of gases, like with fillings. I didn't even think about that. So if you're being cremated, you think you're doing something you're doing something environmentally friendly, but it actually may not be.
No.
Yeah.
And I think more research needs to be done on that. But what's out at the moment is that when you cremate a body, if you do have fillings or metals in your body, it emits a certain gas. And ultimately, you're putting that out into the atmosphere. In addition to that, the ashes also are not environmentally friendly. And if you were to go on the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency website, you'll find that there are recommendations if you want to be buried at sea, for example, and you want to pour out the ashes,
Right.
it has to be a certain number of miles away from the shore. So cremation, while it is an option, I don't think it's really the best one for us. I think we're going down a continuum, and as the months and years go by, I believe that you're going to see more people asking about a green burial or at least exploring that as a viable option. But until then, this book, The Ultimate To-Do List When Your Loved One Dies, gives people the information that they need to make an informed choice.
There's another part of the book that I really want to talk about, because this is overwhelming, right? And while you're dealing with all of this, there's also the eulogy.
Yes.
And you actually give tips on how to write a eulogy. I mean, how does somebody do that when they're also in the process of dealing with the casket and the funeral director and the flowers and the food and the caterer and, I mean, also the money involved, right? There's a lot of money until you can get the life insurance. Hopefully there is life insurance that will pay back the cost of this. But so what were the tips that you had that you would want to share about a eulogy?
I would say don't wait until the last minute. However, in my case, it was the morning of the service.
Wow.
Because someone else was supposed to give the eulogy, and then I think the funeral home said, well, maybe we won't do one. And I sat there that morning, and my brother-in-law actually came to me and he said, you really need to do the eulogy. Don't let this opportunity pass. Again, this is a celebration of life, your mother's life.
Right.
So that morning, within 1 hour, I sat down and I wrote the eulogy by hand. And I thought about, how do I convey the essence of my mother in this eulogy? How can I share with the people attending this celebration of life, how can I share with them the essence of this person that was so dear to me? And keep it all straight. Not cry, not crack up, you know, it's an emotional time. So as I sat there, I thought, what are the stories that define her? How can I help people to see who she was? She loved to play cards, so I started documenting, you know, when did we laugh the most? It was an event where we're in Austria and we're walking, we're on vacation in Innsbruck, and a bird dropped something on her head.
That's funny.
And we laughed like crazy. And
Right.
retelling that story within the context of a sad moment allowed people to see that she was someone that loved to laugh. She loved to play cards. She always had a coffee pot on. And these are the little tidbits that I was documenting. What do you know about my mom? What do you appreciate about her? How can I share the essence of this woman to others who want to be there in support of her? And I used those stories. I documented first just the items by words, and then I organized those real quickly. You know, what's the logic of this? If you have experience in giving speeches, it's quite easy, but if you don't...
Well, I don't know, because I have to tell you, I've given a lot of speeches, and I'm not looking forward to giving a eulogy.
Yeah.
Because it's emotional.
It's very emotional. But I can tell you, I believe that it was the greatest gift that I ever gave my mom, is
Wow.
that I used my words and my gift as a speaker to talk about her. I made people laugh. I made people cry. I made them laugh again. You know, I took them on her journey, much of which was very positive. But we're at a moment of loss, and so I have to also be talking about how she influenced my life. And I use that moment to let people know, one, I'm proud and honored to do this eulogy.
Right.
Even if I knew that I may crack up, my dad was sitting right in the front, and he started crying so hard that I had to take a deep breath and say, I can't break up here. I have to continue. But when it was all over with, I just melted, like I was overcome by the experience. But again, I would say, if you're asked to do a eulogy for someone, the very first thing you need to embed is it's an honor to talk about someone's life, and I've been asked to do it, and I need to do my best. The second thing is to tell stories of their life and to tell what their life meant to you, so you make it personal. And then, obviously you close.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. So after it's all over and you've managed to get through everything, you have a list of people that you need to contact or places you need to contact, like Social Security. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I think some of these things actually need to be done in that time frame. And if you were to ask me what's the first phone call you need to make, it would be actually two at the same time if you can make it happen. One's your life insurance company. Hopefully you have life insurance. And secondly, it's to Social Security. You have to let them know. There's so many intricacies about Social Security. For example, if I were your husband and died today, and your income was more than mine, you get only your Social Security. You do not get my Social Security.
Okay.
Now, your expenses may still be the same. That to me was the biggest shock. My dad does not get my mom's Social Security. He had the highest income, not very much Social Security to speak of. So to go from having another income, receiving that, I believe it's $255, a death fee from Social Security.
It's a one-time fee?
One-time fee, and then he only gets his Social Security. That for me was the biggest, wow, I didn't know that moment.
Yeah, I didn't
because
either.
his budget remains the same,
right.
But now all of a sudden it's minus this Social Security income. And I would tell you that if you receive your check on the 1st, the person dies on the 6th, you are responsible for giving that check back. You cannot have that check within that month.
Oh, wow.
If they die on the 29th, you cannot have the check for that month.
So that would be your first phone call. Like, let them
Social
know.
Security,
Yeah.
yes. And it's almost like you have to have the marriage certificate, knowledge of when you were married, also knowledge of the death, when did she die, and they ask you details of that. And then they want to make sure, are you really the husband of this woman?
Right.
So you start off as the administrator, and then they say, where is the spouse? May I speak to him or her? And then you hand the phone over. But you have to have all this information in place.
Now, the checklist is fantastic. I never would have thought of all these people you have to contact. There's one that I thought was interesting, if we could just talk on it quickly. Facebook. You mentioned something about contacting Facebook. Why would you do that?
Right. Well, if someone has passed away and people keep responding to their Facebook page, it's not a good thing, I don't think. I mean, the same thing with any other social media presence. You could have a website, a Yahoo page, a Google Plus now that that's out.
Right.
You have a YouTube page. You have all these other social media pages, and each of them has a specific policy to close out an account. And that's detailed in the book. You have to look at even passwords, for example, to bank accounts, but your whole online presence is now another thing for us to deal with. Do you have your spouse's account number and password to all the accounts that person is involved in? Take it to the next level. Let's say that you're a small business owner. Right. What happens to your business? What happens to all of those automatic payments? So the whole internet paradigm is something that needs to be looked at, and if you could do it before death, then it makes it easier for whoever has to be the executor of your process.
This has been very fascinating. Thank you so much. If somebody wanted to contact you, how would they do that?
Sure. My name again is Donna Vincent Roa. I'm the author of The Ultimate To-Do List When Your Loved One Dies. If you'd like to reach me, you can reach me at donna@funeraltodolist.com. I also have a website of the same name, funeraltodolist.com. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Making It Last. See you next week.